There is a photograph taken in September 1931 in a 9-room Munich apartment at Prinzregentenplatz 16. You cannot see the room. What the photograph shows is the outside of a locked door. Behind that door, a 23-year-old woman named Geli Raubal lay dead on the floor with a gunshot wound to the chest, shot with Adolf Hitler's own pistol. By the time police were allowed in, a private meeting of senior Nazi officials had already been held in the apartment. No formal autopsy was ever performed. The official verdict was suicide, and the man who owned both the apartment and the gun was 200 kilometers away in Nuremberg when she died. Her name appears in almost every Hitler biography, usually in a paragraph. What rarely gets examined is the pattern she belonged to. Because Geli Raubal was not the only woman destroyed by proximity to Adolf Hitler. She was one of at least 8 women linked to Hitler attempted or completed suicide. Not one of them is well explained by the history books. Some are barely known at all. And at least one of them died not in 1945, but in 1971. A child born into this orbit, who never chose it, who grew up carrying a name that followed her everywhere, and who took her own life at 26. This is the story of what Hitler actually did to the women around him. Not the version written after the war, but the details that were suppressed, disputed, or quietly buried alongside them. In the autumn of 1932, a film director named Adolf Zeisler received a visit from one of Germany's most famous actresses. Her name was Renate Müller. Blonde, blue-eyed, 31 years old, the biggest star in German cinema, at a moment when Marlene Dietrich had already left for Hollywood. Müller had recently spent an evening alone with Hitler at the Reich Chancellery. She had come to tell Zeisler what happened there. According to what she told him, an account he later published, and which was also cited in a wartime OSS intelligence report, the evening began with Hitler describing in clinical detail the torture methods used by the Gestapo, comparing them with medieval techniques. Then, without warning, he removed his clothes and lay down on the floor. He told her to hit him. He told her he was her slave. He was, he said, unworthy to be in the same room as her. She refused. He continued. Eventually, she gave in. She later told Zeisler she had felt physically sick. He thanked her courteously, rang for a servant to show her out, and the car took her home through the dark streets of Berlin. 5 years later, Renate Müller was dead. She fell from the window of a Berlin sanatorium on October 7, 1937, at 31 years old. One account states that just before she fell, a car pulled up outside and 4 SS officers stepped out. The German press reported her death as epilepsy. What Müller's story reveals, what all of these stories reveal, is that the destruction of the women around Hitler rarely happened all at once. It accumulated. It began years earlier, usually with a version of the same offer: attention, status, proximity to power. And then, slowly or suddenly, the cost of that proximity became clear. In the summer of 1926, a 16-year-old girl named Maria Reiter was walking her dog through the Kurpark in Berchtesgaden when a 37-year-old man in a light English-style overcoat stopped to admire the dog. He called himself Herr Wolf. He was charming and attentive in a way she had not experienced before, and he asked to see her again. Her name for him, Wolf, would stay with her for the rest of her life. His name for her was Mimi. He told her he wanted to marry her, to have blonde children with her, to build a life with her once he had fulfilled what he called his duty to Germany. She believed him. She waited. In 1928, she learned that Hitler had been in Berchtesgaden without contacting her. The reason, passed to her through an intermediary, was an anonymous letter threatening to expose the relationship. Hitler was concerned about the political damage of being publicly linked to a 16-year-old. He sent a messenger with the news. Not a letter, a messenger. She tried to hang herself with a clothesline in her room. Her brother-in-law found her and cut her down before she died. Maria Reiter outlived Hitler by almost 50 years. She died in 1992, at 82, in an old people's home in Munich. Those who knew her in her final years described her as a heavy drinker, depressed, largely alone. She left almost nothing behind. A handful of love letters from a man who called himself Wolf, and documentation she gave to her doctor. She is buried in an anonymous grave at the Westfriedhof in Munich. The grave has no name on it. When Heinrich Hoffmann introduced a 17-year-old photography assistant to his most important client in the autumn of 1929, he described the man only as Herr Wolf. Eva Braun later told her sister that she'd been up a ladder filing papers when the man came in, and that she'd been conscious he was looking at her legs. She had shortened her skirt that day and felt embarrassed that the hem wasn't even. The relationship that followed would last 16 years and be conducted almost entirely in secret. Hitler believed his appeal to German women depended on his appearing to be unmarried and wholly devoted to the nation. Eva Braun served that arrangement without complaint, at least outwardly. She was kept in Munich, then at the Berghof in the Alps, rarely appearing in public with him, almost never acknowledged. In November 1932, after an extended absence in which Hitler had not contacted her, she shot herself in the chest with her father's pistol. She then rang Hitler's personal doctor herself, who arrived in time to save her life. Hitler came to visit her at the clinic with flowers. For a few months, he paid her more attention. It didn't last. By May 1935, she was writing in her diary, "If I don't get an answer by 10 tonight, I'll take my 25 pills and lie down peacefully." A few pages later, "I have decided on 35 pills so as to make death certain this time." She took an overdose of sleeping pills. She survived again. Hitler, faced with the possibility of a second private scandal involving a woman, Geli Raubal had died in his apartment just 4 years earlier, arranged for Eva to have her own villa in Munich and a car with a chauffeur. She understood the transaction. She recorded in her diary in 1935, "The weather is gorgeous, and I, the mistress of the greatest man in Germany and the whole world, have to sit at home and look at it through the window." Hitler's own chauffeur, speaking after the war, said Eva Braun was the unhappiest woman in Germany. Her 33 photograph albums, now held at the US National Archives, document in color what her life actually looked like. Skiing trips, calisthenics, afternoon films, the same small circle of Berghof guests year after year. She is almost never photographed with Hitler. She married him on April 29, 1945, in the Führerbunker in Berlin, as Soviet artillery shook the walls above them. The civil ceremony lasted a few minutes. She was 33. Less than 40 hours later, she was dead. Cyanide capsule bitten and swallowed in a sitting room 2 floors underground. Her body was carried up the stairs and burned in the Chancellery Garden. But between Maria Reiter and Eva Braun, there was Geli. Angela Maria Raubal, Geli, was Hitler's half-niece, 19 years his junior. She had come to Munich in 1929 when her mother took the position of housekeeper at the Berghof, and Hitler had asked her specifically to remain in his Munich apartment. She enrolled in medicine at the university. She had, by accounts of those who knew her, a lively personality and brown eyes that photographs didn't capture well. By 1931, witnesses reported that she was not permitted to leave the apartment without an escort. She was not allowed to travel to Vienna, where she had wanted to study singing. When she expressed an interest in a man, there were reports of a musician in Linz, and separately, more sinister claims about a pregnancy. Those around Hitler ensured it went nowhere. On September 18, 1931, Hitler and Geli had a violent argument. He left for Nuremberg for a meeting. She was found dead the following morning in his study, shot through the lung with his Walter pistol. The wound, several physicians later noted, was inconsistent with a self-inflicted gunshot. It was difficult to shoot oneself through the lung from the typical angle. Her nose, witnesses reported, appeared to have been broken. What happened before the police arrived has never been fully established. Senior Nazi officials, among them Gregor Strasser, Baldur von Schirach and Rudolf Hess, held a private meeting in the apartment on the morning of September 19th before authorities were called. The investigative detective who handled the case, a man named Sauer, attempted to reopen the investigation because he was unsatisfied with the answers he'd received. The Minister of Justice in Bavaria intervened and closed the case. The journalist, Fritz Gerlich, who was reportedly in possession of a state's attorney inquiry suggesting Geli had been killed on Hitler's orders, was arrested when stormtroopers raided his offices in March 1933. He was sent to Dachau and killed on the Night of the Long Knives in June 1934. His wife was notified by the delivery of his blood-spattered spectacles. The file containing the record of Sauer's second investigation no longer exists. Only his original interview notes survive. They do not support a clean conclusion in either direction. Hitler had Geli's room at the Berghof preserved exactly as she left it. Her portrait hung in his private quarters until 1945. Hermann Goering said at Nuremberg that her death changed his relationship to all other people. Whether that is an explanation or simply an observation, nobody can say. Renate Müller had been Germany's biggest female film star since 1931. The lead in Victor und Victoria, which would later be remade in Hollywood, and a dozen other box office successes. Blue-eyed, sophisticated, fluent in English and French, she was exactly what Goebbels needed after Marlene Dietrich refused to come home from America. The problem was that Müller also had a Jewish boyfriend, a man named Frank Deutsch, who had already fled to London. She visited him there as often as her schedule allowed. The Gestapo followed her on these trips. When she returned to Germany after one visit, she found she had been quietly placed on a blacklist for major productions. Goebbels eventually pressured her into making a single propaganda film, Togger, released in February 1937, in which her character fights against Jewish control of the press. It was the only propaganda film she ever made, and she was reportedly sick over it. After Togger, she made no more films. She had told director Zeisler about the evening at the Chancellery. In a state of increasing psychological distress and morphine dependency, she checked into a Berlin sanatorium in October 1937 with a knee injury. She was on the verge of being discharged when she went out a window. Goebbels asked her colleagues not to attend the funeral. The German press reported she had died of epilepsy. No formal inquiry was ever opened. On the morning of September 3rd, 1939, the same morning Britain declared war on Germany, a 25-year-old English aristocrat named Unity Valkyrie Mitford walked into the Gauleiter's office in Munich to ask whether she would be detained as an enemy alien. She was told she would not. Two men were assigned to keep an eye on her as she left. She lost them somewhere near the English Garden. Unity Mitford was the daughter of a British baron, one of the celebrated Mitford sisters, and had been part of Hitler's private circle since 1935. Her recently discovered diaries, authenticated by handwriting and paper analysis and published in early 2025, record 139 meetings with Hitler over 4 years, all of them marked in red ink, like a schoolgirl's diary entries about a pop star. She sat beside him at rallies. She spent weekends at the Berghof. Eva Braun, watching from across the room, wrote of her in her own diary with barely concealed venom. She is known as the Valkyrie and looks the part, including her legs. In the English Garden that morning, Mitford took out a pearl-handled pistol. Hitler had given it to her himself for her protection. She shot herself in the temple. She did not die. Surgeons in Munich stabilized her, but considered the bullet too dangerous to remove. Hitler visited her bedside repeatedly and paid her hospital bills personally. He arranged her transport to Switzerland and eventually back to England, where she arrived on a stretcher in January 1940. Her sister Deborah later described finding her. The person lying in bed was desperately ill. She had lost 2 stone, was all huge eyes and matted hair, untouched since the bullet went through her skull. Unity Mitford lived for 8 more years in England. She had permanent brain damage, impaired mobility, difficulty speaking, incontinence. She required nursing care she had never needed before and would never stop needing. The bullet remained in her brain until meningitis killed her in May 1948, when she was 33 years old. There is a disputed claim, raised by a declassified MI5 diary and investigated by journalist Martin Bright in 2002, that the Home Secretary personally intervened to prevent Mitford from being questioned on her return, and that the shooting itself may have been at least partly staged or exaggerated to provide political cover for her return to Britain without prosecution. The investigation was never opened. Her papers were sealed for decades. Eva Braun's younger sister Gretel was 28 when she married SS Gruppenführer Hermann Fegelein at the Mirabell Palace in Salzburg on June 3, 1944. Hitler and Himmler both signed as witnesses. Eva had organized the entire wedding herself, overseeing every detail. "I would like this marriage to be as beautiful as if it were my own," she told those around her. 3 days after the wedding, the Allies landed in Normandy. Fegelein, by all accounts, was not a faithful husband. By April 1945, with Soviet forces closing in on Berlin, he simply vanished from the Führerbunker. Discovered a few streets away in civilian clothes, apparently preparing to leave the country. Hitler ordered him shot. Eva Braun, who was 8 months pregnant, begged for his life. Hitler was, in the words of his secretary Traudl Junge, implacable. Fegelein was executed in the Reich Chancellery Garden on April 28, 1945. The same day Hitler and Eva Braun married. 2 days later, Eva Braun was dead. On May 5, 1945, 3 days after Hitler's death, and 3 days before Germany surrendered, Gretel Braun gave birth to a daughter at Zell am See in Austria. She named her Eva Barbara after her sister. Gretel Braun changed her name, eventually remarried a textile distributor named Kurt Berlinghoff, and lived quietly in Munich until her death from Alzheimer's disease in 1987. She gave almost no interviews. British intelligence transcripts of her post-war interrogations, if they exist, have never been made public. Her daughter Eva Barbara grew up carrying the Fegelein name in post-war Germany. She lived privately, avoided attention, and by most accounts tried simply to build a life at a distance from everything she had been born into. In 1971, when she was 26 years old, her fiancé was killed in a car accident. She died by suicide shortly after. Eva Barbara Fegelein was born on May 5, 1945, 3 days after Adolf Hitler died in the bunker. She was the last child born to the Nazi inner circle, the last person in that family web to survive into adulthood. And when she died in 1971, at exactly the age Geli Raubal had been when she was found in that Munich apartment 40 years earlier, nobody wrote about it much. She is not in most history books. What these women share is not victimhood in any simple sense. Some of them were true believers, some complicit, some simply unlucky in who they loved. Unity Mitford wrote in her newly surfaced diary that she was practicing to kill Jews. Maria Reiter kept Hitler's letters until the day she died. Eva Braun photographed the Berghof garden parties while Europe burned. But the pattern is real, and the pattern has an endpoint that nobody planned for. A girl born in May 1945, named after her dead aunt, who grew up in a country processing shame she hadn't created, carrying a name she hadn't chosen. 8 suicides, or attempted suicides, across the women closest to one man. A final one in 1971 that extended the damage into a generation that never met him. Historians still disagree about what happened in the locked room on Prinzregentenplatz in September 1931. The file that might have answered that question was destroyed. The journalist who possessed the most important documents was murdered. The detective who wanted to reopen the case was overruled. Whether Geli Raubal killed herself or was killed, the door was locked from the inside, but somebody had the key.